Hey everybody, welcome to another responsive design video. In this video, I want to talk about custom properties, creating and using custom properties. Custom properties are things in CSS that work a lot like variables. If you've ever done any programming like JavaScript or Java or C or anything like that, you've worked with variables. If you haven't done that, then you can think of a variable as like a box that holds a value, and we can use that box over and over and over and over and over again throughout the code. And if you change the value in that box, every place that that variable is used, that value gets updated with that new change. Okay, so we'll see what that looks like in just a minute. Let's take a look at the HTML. The HTML is a basic layout that we've been using basically since the very beginning of all of these videos that I've created. And if you've stuck with me through these classes, you've probably watched a good 100 videos or so using this standard type of layout. I've got a div called grid container. In it, there's a header with an H1, as always. I've got my nav with UL, a series of LIs with the links, as always. I've got my main content, which is a div that contains a series of articles, each of my articles containing an H2 and a series of paragraphs. I've got one article in the main content, okay? And then I've got a sidebar, div class sidebar, that's got an article, an H2, a series of paragraphs. And then I've got my footer, right? And then the closing div for the grid container wraps the whole thing up. I'm not really going to mess around with the layout on this video, so you don't have to worry too much about that HTML. Just know that I've got paragraphs, H1s, and H2s in there because those are the things that I'm going to modify. Now I have two linked style sheets here, one called normalize.css and one called typography.css. The way this works is the browser is going to parse through all of the normalize and apply it first. And then it's going to parse through the typography style sheet and override any styles from normalize. So if you have any conflicting styles, let's say H1 is styled in normalize, well, when it comes across the H1 style in typography, it's going to override what was done in normalize and use the one from typography. The reason it does that is because it does it in vertical order. So it does this one first and then does this one first, and then it uses the last sets of styles that it comes across. Okay? Now, let's take a look at these style sheets really quickly. I'm not going to go into too much depth into what normalize is, but it is a style sheet that I've gotten from somebody online. What it does, it sets all of the values for various elements so that they display the same in all browsers. You may have noticed that some things have different margins and line heights and stuff like that between different browsers. Well, this is going to correct all of that stuff. I'm not going to go into any more detail on it. It's a pretty long style sheet. I did not create this. The citation is right up here. If you want to follow that link, you can get this as well. My typography style sheet is going to contain my defined custom properties. So let's take a look at what some of these are. First off, I'm setting a baseline font size for my whole document. When you see this thing :root, the colon is defining a pseudo class selector. And :root is saying the root element of your document. We've talked about root element before. I've used that language before. The root element is the element that wraps everything up. So in this case, HTML is the outermost element or the root element. You can see it wraps up the body, which wraps up this div, which wraps up everything else, right? So root is the outermost element. So when you do :root, you're saying that you are applying this to everything within the document. So when I go :root font size 16 pixels, it's setting a baseline for the whole entire thing so that all fonts are going to have 16 pixel in size. Now, I've got another style rule for root, and this is where I'm setting up my custom properties. A custom property looks like this. It starts out with 2 dashes and then a name, an identifier. Names have to be alphanumeric. In other words, letters and numbers. They can have dashes in them, and they cannot have any special characters. So for example, I can't do something like max font percent size. That's not acceptable. The dash is acceptable. Another way to do this could be using what's called camel case, where you've got max font size all squished together, but each word has an uppercase separating it from the others. They call it camel case because there's like humps, like a camel would have. I prefer this way of doing it with dashes in between. Okay? So this is what a custom property looks like. And I've defined a series of custom properties. I've created one called max font size, and I've set it to 7 rem. I've set one called min font size to 1 rem. And then I've set a series of other properties. FS 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. And they're all scaling up by a factor of 1.333. And what I mean by that is font size 200 is 1 rem or 1 rem times 1.333. 300 is 200 font size times 1.333333. 400 is 300 times 1.333. You following that? So each one of these jumps up by a scale of 1.333. So I've set these up so I can use them throughout my code. Now let's take a look at how they're used. Once I define these, I'm going to define them in the root here. I can use them elsewhere. So I'm going to use them in these areas here. I've created some style rules for H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. And I've used the different font size properties respectively. So H1 is my largest, so I'm going to use the FS 600. Okay? FS 600 will go into here. Var, this is a function. Var means variable. So it starts with var, and then it's got the parentheses. And that function has to take something into those parentheses. And you pass in one of these properties. So in this case, I'm passing in dash dash fs dash 600. So property fs 600 is going to have this value. So what this is saying is that when an h1 comes onto the screen, it's going to use the value that's stored in this variable. In this case, it's going to be 4.209 rem. Let's take a look at this in the browser. I'm going to open this up, and it is called Custom Props. And here's what we have. I've got my H1 here. I've got my H2. I've got a series of paragraphs. Let's debug. Let's go in debug mode, inspect. So right-click, inspect, and let's see what the styles are doing here. I'm going to look for my H1. Which is going to be in header. Click on H1 and I'll see what it says. So H1 is not using 2M. H1 is using this right here. It's coming from typography.css line 20. It's using font size var FS 600. And when I look down here, inherited from HTML, I can see the FS 600 is 4.209. So you can see it's using this variable. It's using that value from this variable. Let's tweak one of those values. I'm going to go here and change the 4.209 rem to, I'm going to go to 7 rem. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back here and refresh it. And it got bigger. It got quite a bit bigger. Okay, so you can see now FS600 is at 7 rem, and it's still using FS600. So this font size in H1 is using this value here from this property. So if I want to change that property, if I want to change it back to what it was before, the 4.209, it will be respected everywhere in this entire document. So what if I did something like this? Maybe I had my paragraphs, my H1s, my H2s, my H3s, my H4s. Well, I don't have H3 and H4 in there, so I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to go paragraph H1 and H2. And let's just say for some weird reason, I decided to have all of their font sizes set to var FS 400. Okay, save it. Now all these are going to use FS 400. And they all got smaller, right? Well, the paragraphs got bigger, but the H2 got smaller and the H1 got smaller. We can see here that now my paragraph H1 and H2 are all using this value, FS 400. The cool thing about this is now I've got all of these things using FS 400. If I wanted to change how they all are styled, maybe I want this to go all the way up to 7 rem. I change it in one place, and then it changes for everything else. So now that I changed the value on that property, they all respect the change in the value on that property. This is the power of using these properties, or variables, if you will. I'm going to use these in future videos. So just understand what they are and be able to recognize them when I use them in future videos, and hopefully use them in your own web designs. Thanks for watching.